Check. All right, my levels look good. I hope everybody can hear me. Welcome, everybody. Let's get started. So tonight we are going to take a look at the next phase in our development adventure, which is we're going to start working with the back end. So let's take a quick look at what we're going to accomplish tonight. So tonight we are moving from the front end, which, as you recall, entails HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, everything that runs in your browser. Tonight we're going to jump to the back end. So we're going to build our very first Express back end, and we're going to do this on a production grade server. So we're going to show you a few things that are a little above and beyond what a lot of people expect out of these kinds of lessons. Usually you'll start this on your development laptop, but tonight we're actually going to show you how to do this on a server. So you'll learn how to set up the server, you'll get some basic code working on it, and then you'll come to understand why these things are important and why we're doing this way. Along the way, we're going to show you a really cool trick. I'm going to show you how to set up Visual Studio Code for remote development. So you're going to get a gist of what all that means when we actually get into the lesson itself. But let's talk a little bit about background first. So first, let's talk about what Express actually is. So again, remember there's two parts to every web application. There's the front end, which we just talked about, HTML, CSS, the things that your users are interacting with. Basically everything that runs in the browser on their computer, that's called the front end. And we're going to start working with the back end. Now you might be asking yourself, why do we need a front end and a back end? Why does that split even exist? Well, browsers are designed to be highly secure. You wouldn't like it if someone could write a virus where if you just went to a web page, your computer could be infected. And I know there's tales of such things happening, but that doesn't really exist. Browsers, since their very inception, since they were very first developed and used, have always maintained a high level of security, and they do that by extremely limiting or seriously limiting what you can actually do in your code. So there's all kinds of things that you might want to do as a software developer that are normal in, say, a desktop environment or even writing software for a mobile phone that you simply can't do in a browser. For example, you can't read and write files. You're not allowed to access any serious system resources. Now in HTML5, we do have a little bit more than we've had in the past. We have the ability through a set of APIs, application programmer interfaces, where we can actually interface with certain elements on the computer, like, in particular on phones, like GPS systems. We can access cameras. There's a few things we can do, but by and large, you're not allowed to read and write files to the user's computer. Right? Now, I'm not talking about download files. That's something different. Your code cannot dynamically write files. They cannot dynamically read files. Think about how awful it would be if you could. Someone would be able to use JavaScript to just read your documents folder or enumerate the files that are there and look for things that might be interesting and then pull them over to their side of the web. That would be awful. The browser is designed to stop people from doing that. So you can't read or write files, you can't access system resources, and you don't have the ability to work with databases. Now we're going to cover databases in a different part of the boot camp. But this is basically the bread and butter of most of our web applications, is reading and writing data to and from databases. That's the bulk of what you're going to be doing unless you're doing something really specialized, like you're working with AI algorithms or something like that. And even those are going to be reading and writing databases at a slightly different scale. But most of the time you're going to be working with applications that are doing that database work, e-commerce applications, line of business applications. The kind of thing that make companies work are based around databases. So we'll cover that later on in the boot camp, but just know that your browser, with a rare exception, really can't access a database. It certainly can't do it easily, and it certainly can't do it very securely. So Express can do all of these things. Okay, since it's running on a server, it's running on a completely different computer from the computer that your user is operating. It's operating on a computer that's more powerful and it's centralized. And so this centralized server has the ability to work with all of these different resources that are at its disposal. and that can be done in a secure way. But all of those security restrictions in the browser don't apply on the server. So it allows us a lot more leeway, a lot more ability, a lot more capability to do things on the back end that you simply can't do in the front end. And another great thing that didn't make the slide, your end users can always view the source code to your application in their browser. And this can be a bad thing. If you've got something that's highly secure, or if it is highly proprietary, let's say you came up with a really great way to do something in code, you don't want people to be able to easily steal that and use it for their own purposes. So if you have code running server side, no one can see that. That's not visible from the browser. You can't just right click view source and see the back end code. It's completely hidden, it's completely safe, and it's secure. And that allows us to do things in a different way. We can do things more securely, but again, you can also protect your intellectual property. All right, so these are the benefits of Express. Tonight, we're going to make the simplest Express application that you possibly can. It's not going to be doing any of this cool stuff. We're just going to get an Express app up and working, and we're just going to do the classic Hello World application that everybody starts with. So to give it a little bit of a twist, we're actually going to run this on a production server. So what do I mean by that? When you write a web application, you'll be writing it on Windows on your desktop, or maybe if you have a Mac, you'll be writing on the Mac. But the computer that you're going to be running it on in production, where your customers actually use it, that's most often going to be a different kind of server. That's usually going to be a server running an operating system called Linux. So I thought I would just make this a little more interesting tonight by introducing you to Linux so you can get a flavor for this. It will just take us a minute to set up this server that I have on my lab, within my lab environment. So we'll take a look at the steps and you'll get to see what it looks like when we actually configure a server where your code is going to run, say, in the cloud. This is usually where it's going to be hosted. So that's what we're going to do this evening. So let's get started. So to start, I need to go to my lab computer. And to get to it, I need to use my terminal. So I'm going to launch my terminal. I have a session up from earlier, so let me just clear this out. And this particular terminal, I'm using my Linux environment on my Windows machine. So this just gives us a cleaner experience, I think. You could use PowerShell, you could use your terminal in Mac, whichever you want to use. But all of those terminals are going to be using basically the same commands. That's what makes this handy. Okay, so what I'm going to do to get to that server is I'm going to type in SSH followed by my username and then the IP address. Now I have this earlier and I'm terrible at remembering IP addresses, so I'm just going to go back to my earlier command. Remember, we learned this pretty early in the boot camp. We have the ability to use our up and down arrow keys. Pardon me. The allergens here are rather high in Texas today, so got a little bit of a cough going on if I'm talking for too long, so apologize for that. But we have SSH. Now you can use the up and down keys to move between our history, right? As programmers, we want to type as little as possible. I had someone tell me one time they think they have a limited finite number of keystrokes within their lifetime and they don't want to waste them on typing in SSH commands, right? So I totally get that. So this is easier to just remember to use your up and down arrow keys to get to the commands that you've typed before. So here I've got SSH, secure shell. We're going to remotely log into a machine at 192.168.58.131. That IP address is not going to work on your machine, so you'll have to use a different IP address. I'm just going to demonstrate on this machine how this is going to work. So I'm going to hit this, and I'm going to type in my password. All right, and now we are logged into the remote server. And it looks like I have an up-to-date system here. So the first thing I usually like to do is see if there's anything available by way of updates. So I'll type in sudo. This is the super user command. Anytime we do a command that affects the entire operating system, we have to use this sudo or super user do command. Sudo is su is super user, do, that makes sense, right? So super user do, and then whatever you want to do at that level. So this is the administrator level access. We're going to do sudo apt. That's the advanced packaging tool. This is what allows me to update my system. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do sudo apt update. This is going to go get a list of any updates that I have for my system. Now, in the real world, I would probably have this configured to run automatically, but this is a web machine. This is a lab machine, I should say. And it actually says I do have some packages that can be upgraded. And I'm going to need to install Node.js here in just a minute as well, since I don't have that on this machine. So bear with me for just a minute. I'll show you how to upgrade. This is kind of a bonus. I wasn't planning on this. We can do sudo apt full upgrade -y, and it will automatically download and install those upgrades. All right. Perfect. Now we have a fully up-to-date system. The next thing we're going to want to do is install Node.js, and we're going to use the long-term support version. All right, so the long-term support version, if you go out to Node.js, let me get a browser for you here just a minute. Good. If we go to nodejs.org, we'll find that there are a couple of versions on their website. So the first one is this LTS. This is long-term support. This is the one you want to use. Okay, so where you're installing it on your system, you want to use this one. This is the one that's going to be around for a while. 20.1.0, that's the latest and greatest. And you might think, well, why am I not using the latest and greatest? We're talking tonight about a production application that's going to go up. It's going to be used. Hopefully, our application is going to be a smashing success. It's going to be used by hundreds of thousands of users per day. I want the most stable thing possible running my application, don't you? So this will have some cutting edge, bleeding edge features on it. Maybe not fully tested, maybe not fully working, but the long-term support version, that is rock solid and it's guaranteed to work for several years. So when you're configuring something for production, and even me personally, I like to use the same thing in production, or on my development machine that I'm going to use in production. I always recommend you go with the LTS version. Anytime you see anything with an LTS on it, operating system, package manager, anything, LTS, that's the one you want. That's the one that's going to get you where you need to go. All right, so let's go ahead and install this. So it's sudo apt install, and we need, I believe it's Node.js. Hopefully that's right. And it will ask me if I want to do this or not. Oh, nope, it's just going to install it. Okay, so it installed it. Let's just make sure it works. I can type in which node like that, and it will give me a path or a location to user bin node. And then I can check which version I got. So I can say node -- version, and it should tell me it's 18. And then the other thing I always want to check is the second half of this, or the other side of this coin. Node is what's going to run our application. Let's make sure the node package manager is here too. So let's do npm -- version. And it should tell us a different number. They're not going to be the same number. And it doesn't matter if your numbers are the same as mine. They're probably not going to be, because these new editions come out weekly, right? So if it just to be 18 and 9, even if it's higher than that, that's fine. As long as you get numbers, that's all we're really looking for, is we want there to be numbers there. If there's not numbers there, then it's going to give you some error saying, I don't know what node means, so help me out here, right? So and on Linux, the operating system we're using right now, it'll actually tell you, hey, you should install this using, and it'll give you the command to install it. So that's pretty handy. So we've got node installed and we've got npm installed. So we are all set and ready to start. So let's go ahead and create our very first node application, or I should say our very first Express application. But first we have to make a node application. So let's do a listing here. I don't think I have anything on this server yet. So I'm going to make a folder. I'm going to type mkdir, and I'm going to call it first-express. All right, we'll create that. Just make sure it was created. There it is. And now I'm going to cd into that. You guys remember how to do that? Cd, change directory. We're going to cd into first express. All right. And then how do I create my node project? Do you guys remember how to do that? It's npm init. Now, I always say that programmers are lazy. I don't really mean we're lazy. I just mean we like to do things as easily as possible, the smallest number of steps. Some people might call that lazy. I call it productive. Let's be productive. So let's do npm init -y. This will bypass all these silly little questions. I know we've seen these in other classes before, but I'm just reminding you. So npm init -y, this is going to initialize our project, and it's going to generate this package.json file. So now if I do an ls in here, I can see I've got package.json, and the contents are displayed right above, so we can see what's there. If I want to take a look at it directly, I'm on the server. I haven't set up Visual Studio for this yet, but if I want to take a quick peek at it, I can just type in cat for catalog, package.json. Okay, so I can see it has a name, it has a version, a description, just the basics are there. Not a lot going on yet. So this is an Express project. So the first thing we're going to need to do is install Express. So let's do that. Let me go back. Let's get rid of this browser window. And I'll go back here to my terminal, and I'll type in npm install, or you could just do npm I if you want to be lazy / efficient. That's shorter, right? npm I. And then we need the name of the Express package. Now, where can we find that if we don't remember it? The easiest place to find any node package is at npmjs.com. So let's go look, and let's find Express, and it will tell us exactly how to do this. So Express, fast, unopinionated, minimalist web server framework for Node.js. Could not have said it better myself. And the other thing that I always like to do, this is a pro tip for you. First thing you do is you check that weekly downloads number. For a package like Express, very popular, you would expect this number to be very high. If you accidentally typed something incorrectly into your search, you may get some weird package that has like 2 downloads a week. That's a real good indicator that you're in the wrong place. All right, so I always take a look at that weekly downloads. Even if I'm working with something that I've never used before, I'm not quite sure about it, I like to take a look at that number. If that's a nice high number, and it's probably not going to be 22 million most of the time, but if it's a good high number, chances are there's plenty of people using it, and it's probably okay to use. If the number's really low, I'd be careful with that one. All right, so just be careful with those. Sometimes you'll find something really specialized. In that case, sure, the number's going to be low. But for Express should be really high. So 22 million, that's clearly the right 22 million, that's clearly the right one. So let's just get our command here. It's npm I express, and I'm just going to copy it. I'm just going to click this little icon right here. And let me go into my terminal, and I will paste that in. Oops, I had some there already. Let's get rid of that first. And let's paste that in there. And you want to make sure you're in the first Express folder, right? Remember how the node package system works? It installs it in the folder. All right, so we'll hit that, and it says it's good to go now. And it's giving me a warning saying there's a new version of npm. I'm going to ignore that for now. That's okay. Let's take a look at the update to our package.json files. Let's just do cat. Let's do package.json. All right, and now we can see we have a dependency there for Express at 4.18.2. All right, so it's looking pretty good. Now we just need a file that we can put in here. So if I do an ls, I can see that I have node modules, package.json, and I have my package lock.json file. I just need a file for my code. And if you look at our package.json file, we can see that it's expecting us to start with index.js, and I don't have that file yet. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. I'm going to type touch, and then I'm going to type in index.js. All right, that's going to create an empty file called index.js. Now when I do an ls, I can see that I do in fact have an index.js file, but if I go to look inside of it, I can see that it's empty. There's nothing there. Okay, now I could use some sort of editor on the server, but that's not always the most productive way to go. If you're a Vim user, if you're an Emacs fan, even if you like Nano, these are all editors that you can use on the server, but they're not nearly as nice as Visual Studio is. So let's go take a look at Visual Studio Code. I should have said Visual Studio Code, right? Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code are two completely different things. So we're using Visual Studio Code, and let's configure this so that we can log on directly to the server and edit our code as if we were sitting in front of that server. So to do this, we just need to do a Control-Shift-P, and let me see if I have my SSH extension. Oh, I don't. So I need to install my SSH extensions. And I didn't spell it right, so let me just make sure. I don't think so, because I haven't used this computer for this before. So let's go ahead and install this. Let's go into extensions, and let's find remote development. Might take a second to find. We can see there are a few of these, so let's drag this over and see. And the one we're looking for is, these are all individual pieces. What we really want is remote development. And the one you're looking for is Microsoft, right? And use the same rule of thumb for these as you use for anything else. So this one has 3.9 million downloads every week. So that's probably the right one, right? If you find one of these weird ones that has nothing in it, that's probably not the right one. We're going to use this one. It's from Microsoft. Got a ton of downloads. That's the one we want. So I'm going to click that. It's going to install. Right. We're good to go. Now I should be able to do my Control-Shift-P trick again. Control-Shift-P. And I'll type in SSH. And now we have all kinds of options. All right, so I'm going to hit add new SSH host. And I need that IP address again. So let me switch back over to terminal because I can never remember it. Type in IP address show. And my IP address is right here. But it's a server. Oh, yeah, actually, I can copy it. Let me just grab that. I was going to say it's on a server, so I can't grab it. Wait a minute. Is this the right? I don't think that's the right one. Let's see. That's the one I want right there. Right. Let me copy that. Hopefully that copied. Let's do our command, which is SSH Bruce at, and we'll put that IP address in there like so. And now it's going to ask me which configuration file to update. Now, I really only have the one, so I'm going to use the one in my user folder just so I can keep all of my SSH stuff together. It's kind of hard to say, isn't it? All right. So that did it. You can see the message down at the bottom says host added. So let's click new W. No, I don't want that. Not that one. Let's do this even. No, it's not even a thing. Okay, let's do Control-Shift-H. Sorry, that was a little confusing, wasn't it? SSH. And then let's do connect to host. And it knows what we're after because we just added it. So we'll click that. And it's going to ask us some questions. So it created a new window. Let me just blow this up so we can see the whole thing. And it wants to know what it's connecting to, Linux, Mac, or Windows. I'm going to click Linux. And it wants the password to log in. So I'll hit enter. And it will go connect. So you can see it working down here. And it's going to install some tools on that machine. And once it's done, it's going to say, you selected Linux as the remote platform. This will be stored in the settings file. Excellent. If all went well, I can click my folder icon. And now I need to point to the folder that I want to work in. So when I click open folder, you'll notice that now it looks totally different. I'm on a Windows machine, but it's prompting me with things that look more like Linux, right? So forward slashes. So we're in home / Bruce, and then it's giving me a list of folders. Now remember, we created our project in First Express. So let's click on First Express and then click OK. And now we have a connection to that machine. It's prompting me for my password one more time, just to make sure we have access to that. So let me give it that. All right, from here on out, it's like you're working on your local computer. It says, do you trust this folder? Yes, I trust this folder. The guy that wrote this code is a stand-up guy, and I do anything. I give him the shirt off my back. He's a good guy. You can see we have our package.json file. There it is, and our empty index.js file. All right, now we can get down to brass tacks. It's time to start writing our very first Express application. So let's create it. We're going to start with use strict, just like we usually do. Remember what use strict does for us. It forces our JavaScript to use very, very strict, very stringent rules on how we structure our code. So this is something you always want. JavaScript has always played it kind of fast and loose, especially in the browser, and it has allowed programmers for many, many years to be lazy. And I'm not talking about the efficient kind, I'm talking about the sloppy kind. All right, this will prevent you from being sloppy and falling into bad habits. You should always put use strict up there at the top. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and import our Express library rather. So let's type in const. Remember, we're doing a constant. And in ES6, a const is something that is immutable, which is a fancy word for you can't change it once it's been created. That's why they call it a constant. We're going to call it Express. All right, so the convention that you're always going to see is the lowercase e on the front of this. Express tells you that it's a variable that you've created. You'll be able to access the instance of Express. It's a way of instantiating Express. These are all same terminology, same way of saying the same thing over and over again, just using different words. So we're going to instantiate Express. We're going to put it in this variable called Express, little e Express. And then how do we actually do that? We're going to use require, and then we're going to type in Express. All right, semicolon at the end. Don't be one of those people that doesn't put the semicolons on. That's not cool. There are times where you can actually create a great deal of havoc by skipping those semicolons. I know it's a sort of a fad these days, but it's a dangerous one, so be careful with that. All right, in my class, I'm always going to put the semicolon on the end. Next, we need to create an instance of this. So I'm going to type in const. Not sure why I typed car. And we'll call it app. And we will set it equal to module.exports equals express. All right. And when I put those open and close parentheses on there, that's when the instantiation really takes place. So we're saying constant app, we're doing module.exports equals express. So this will be available outside of this particular module because we're exporting it. So to the outside world, not that we're going to have a lot in this thing. In fact, we're not going to have anything on the outside. But this is something that you always want to remember to do, because as your system grows, as your software grows, you're going to want to access this from other files. Later on, when we start talking about testing, external testing, unit testing, it needs to be able to get at the app constant here in order to test our code. All right, so very important, put that in there. If you don't get it right now, don't worry about it. You'll see it later when we actually start making things a little more complicated, and we have these files are going to be able to talk to each other. They're going to be able to bring variables and objects, and they're going to be able to share all kinds of structures. And it's module export that helps you do that. Okay, so we've got our Express. Now let's do really the guts of every Express application, and that is creating a route. All right, so a route is, you'll recognize it as soon as you see it. A route is the URL that you're going to access this through on your browser. All right, so if you think back to when we did fetch commands, when we used Axios, when we talked about this in React and we talked about this in HTML, when we grabbed things from external URLs, this is what we're actually defining on our back end, is what URL this will answer to. So when this runs, it'll run at a URL, at a base address, say amazon.com or whatever your base URL address is, and then you tack on the rest of the URL, and that's how we access these. These are called endpoints. Okay, so we'll do app.get. Okay, so what's get? Get is what we call a verb. There are 4 big HTTP verbs that we're going to be talking about. Get is the simplest. So get, as you can imagine, just pulls information. All right, it's a get. It gets information from the server. There's 3 others, and they follow the CRUD pattern. All right, we're going to talk about CRUD when we get to databases, but it's a really, really simple thing to think about. So CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. They're the most basic information, record-based pieces of information that you can do, or things you can work on with information. All right, so we're getting information. We can also create information. We can update information, and we can delete information. Those are the 4 most basic operations. And HTTP has verbs that will mirror those. So we're just gonna use get tonight. App.get. This is going to respond to a get request. So app.get, and then we need to give it a URL. Now I'm just going to give it a /, which is just basically the root. So if you think back to what we did on the front end, the index.html file was at the root. Here we're doing the root, but it's on the back end. All right, so when we access this, we're just going to get a simple message. And this is what's going to change a lot as we start developing more complicated applications, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's just stick with our basic one tonight. So this particular method takes 2 arguments. The first one is, what path do you want this to intercept? And the second thing is, what do you want to do with it once that path has been intercepted? So your web browser makes a call. This intercepts it. It checks to see what the pattern is. In this case, it's just a /. It could be something more exotic, like we could put a hello here. And then you could go www.myurl.com/hello, and this would pick it up. All right, so it's just taking off the tail end of that URL, and then it's going to respond to it. So you're mapping a route to a function. Where do you want it to be? What do you want it to do when the browser gets there? So let's take a look at the second part of that. What do you want to be done when the browser accesses this URL? We're going to execute a function. All right, and we're just going to use a regular anonymous function here, and it always takes 2 arguments, request and response. Okay, request and response. We'll talk about this a lot in the coming modules. All right, so we'll do request and response. And I usually like to go ahead and put my semicolon there at the end because, as I mentioned, I'm a fan, and I will often forget if I don't go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to go ahead and put that semicolon there so I don't forget to do that later. I'm going to tab over 4 spaces. It's hard to do that when you're talking. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. All right, and then let's do, you know what? It doesn't matter. You can hit tab. I have to admit I'm a Python developer by day. Some days I'm JavaScript, sometimes I'm Python, and I've gotten in the personal habit of spacing 4 times. This language doesn't care if you do 4 spaces, 5 spaces, tabs, whatever, it doesn't matter. So just use the natural indent if you want to. If you want to hit tab, if you want to hit 4 spaces like I did, it's all fine. Visual Studio Code is going to adapt to whatever you do anyway. All right, so one way or another, we'll get the indent in there. And then let's do response, except we want to do res. It's that second argument there, response.send, and then we're going to send some text. We're going to send hello world, right? And we're semicolon at the end. Perfect. We're almost there. We're almost done. This is the easiest web server in the world, isn't it? Okay. Last thing we need to do is we're going to add if not module.parent. Open that up, and then we'll do app.listen, and we'll set that equal to the port 3000, right? And then I like to add a message in here so that I know it started successfully. So I'll say console.log express started at port 3000. All right, perfect. Let's see if it works. Are we ready to run it? Let's open up the terminal. I could switch back to my other terminal, but I think I'm going to use the terminal in Visual Studio Code so we don't have to switch back and forth between several windows. So I'll open that up, and you can see that it's put me right in the file location where I was just working. I can do an ls, I can see all my files are there. And who remembers how to get this to start? There's two ways you can do it. All right, let's go back and look at our package.json file. The first way to do it is to use npm start, and it's going to point to main. The other way, the easier way, the one we're going to use is node and then the name of the file itself, which is index.js. Now remember, when you're typing in your console, you can just type a little bit of that file in there, enough for it to be unique, and then you can hit your tab key. Okay, that's going to automatically complete that line, and now we're good to go. So I'll press enter, and it's going to say it started at port 3000. All right, excellent. Now remember, this is not a front end. There's no pretty web page that's going to launch. We're going to have to actually access this server. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. Let's try Insomnia. I think I have Insomnia on here. Oh, no, I don't. How about Postman? I have that on here either. Well, that's embarrassing. Okay, plan B. Let's go see. I could have swore I had those on here. How about curl? Do we have curl on here? Yeah, we do. Oh, yeah, we have curl on here. All right. I fired up another terminal window. All right, so the other one is still there. It's still running. If I go over to bash, I can do curl, do localhost, port 3000, /. Now let's remember what we typed in here. Let's go back over to index.js. We typed / hello here. So we have to type /, the / is already there. Type hello here as well. And we can see our text there, hello world. What if we wanted to try something a little more interesting? Maybe we put a little HTML around it. All right. Now we've got a p tag around it. All right. It's not really going to serve a web page or anything, but let's mix it up a little bit. If you make a change and I still call this, I'm going to get the same thing. All right, because I haven't restarted it yet. If I go back to that window where I ran it, hit Control C until it stops, I can do my up arrow. Remember we talked about that earlier. Up arrow will give you the last command that you entered, and now I'll start it again. And let me switch back over to curl. Oops. And now I can see my p tags are there. All right, so you've just created the world's simplest, not very useful, but certainly the simplest Express backend. All right. So as you move forward, you'll be able to create more complicated applications by changing the code right here inside of your endpoint definition, the function for your endpoint definition. And this is where the magic is going to happen. You're going to be able to access databases, create files, do any kind of complicated processing that you might want to do. Right? And that's the real power of Express.